Good evening. You've reached the dark side of the mountain. Welcome to South Side Paranormal with your host, DJ Nemo, bringing you top tier investigations. We look at things through history, through time. We look at mysterious hauntings, mysterious creatures, and things that go bump in the night. So strap yourselves in, open up your minds, and question everything. Good evening. You are tuned into Southside Paranormal with your host, DJ Nemo. Welcome, welcome, welcome as we continue the second part of episode 3, season 2. We're talking about aliens. Um, if you are a first time listener to our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We definitely appreciate your love and support over this nice little summer vacation that we all have right now. So, with that being said, let's talk about do a quick little recap of last week's episode. Last week we were talking about alien occurrences here in the state of Arizona. We talked a little bit about Travis Walton. We talked about his case and the things that he experienced. If you need a refresher, you can listen back to episode 3 of season 2 and get more details on specifics on that case, or you can watch Fire in the Sky because it's pretty accurate of Travis Walton's experiences. We also talked about the Phoenix Lights. We also talked about my personal experience experiencing the Phoenix Lights when I was much younger with friends at the river, and then all the fallout that happened because of it with the news, the school, and so forth and so forth. So with that being said, we're going to bring us to the final concluding part 2 of the Alien podcast. And this, we're going to talk specifically about secret underground bases. Now, just for the people that are listening, all of this right here is alleged, and I'm throwing up alleged air quotes right now. So everything that we're going to talk about tonight is alleged. So for people that are listening, I don't want any fallout or repercussions, because we're going to get into some really heavy, dark stuff, and I personally don't want that heat on our podcast because we're having such exponential growth on our podcast. We're having such amazing followers and information and stories being shared out and hosts and all sorts of different things with this podcast. So I'm going to say everything that we're going to talk about tonight is alleged. Now, before I get the heat brought down on me for saying this next part of information, all of this information can be researched on your own. Just literally go into Google, go into like Wikipedia, and it has a lot of that there. So I'm not really revealing anything that's super unknown. I'm just compiling it down into a podcast that's easy to listen to, that you can take the information with them as a basis, because this is just really the surface. This is some heavy stuff, but it is just the surface of alien encounters and stuff like that. You're going to have to go on and do your researches. Like we said from day one of this podcast, you have to do your own research. And we also said that during this podcast, if you didn't believe anything that I said, then you can go back on your own and research it yourself. Let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this incident. All right, so let's get into the first thing we got to talk about. What's the holy grail of alien researchers? We're talking about Area 51. Now, if you don't know where Area 51 is, Area 51 is located outside of Las Vegas. Okay. It's a short drive It's the middle of nowhere. It's called Groom Lake specifically. But this is like the holy mecca of people trying to go out to Area 51 because there's alleged air quotes again, alleged devices, experiments, experimental craft have been sighted at Area 51. And a lot of people are familiar with that. Okay. Area 51 is like the main hotspot. Now, I've been to Area 51. I could tell you right now that is highly restricted. When I first went there, that was like in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. Um, and I remember I went exploring with friends and we were able to hike up to certain mountains. And with high power binoculars, you can actually look down into the base and you can't see it from the road. You have to like hike up to this base and then you can see down in there and you can see it's clear. There's a whole landing strip there. They have a plane that flies daily from Las Vegas International Airport to Groom Lake. It like a 30-40 minute flight every day. They fly them out in the morning and they fly them back at night about 5 p.m. for after work. So think about the security clearance on this, right? It's a private plane. You can't just access it through the terminal. So it has its own private terminal. And so if you work at Area 51 in military progress, you go to the airport right at 8 a.m. The plane takes off. They fly you out there. And then at the end of the day, they fly you back into Las Vegas. Okay, that's the gist of it. Okay, and that's documented. And like you could see there are huge. I mean, it's a huge landing strip. Now you have to remember when this is the late 90s, early 2000s when I saw this. The area that we were at, you can't even access it now. Okay, and not only can you not access it now, it's completely monitored. There's cameras everywhere. There's cameras. There's some kind of sensor devices in the earth that the minute you start trespassing, okay, agents show up. And we don't know what governmental agency these agents are, but they show up. And not only do they show up, there's a clear sign now that there wasn't when I was there exploring it. There's a sign there was a sign, but where we were at in that area, it wasn't fenced off yet. There's a sign now that says, if you trespass onto a federal government facility, you will be shot and killed. Straight up. Like they're very honest with that. And the minute you start going out there, then things start to happen. So after we had gone up there and we hiked back to the car, what do we see on opposing hill? We saw a white government unmarked truck watching us, seeing what we were doing. Okay. Now it's even more tighter security now. They pushed that line back even further to where it was in the early 2000s. Now, because there's so many people that have tried to like go in there. I mean, there was those idiots that were on like, Reddit and 4chan. They're like, we're gonna Naruto run it. Yeah, and then you get shot and killed by the federal government. Because there's clear signs that say that if you try to cross into this government facility, you will be, at minimum arrested, at worst shot and killed. Now, probably the most famous story a lot of people don't know about is this guy named Bob Lazar. Let's talk about my man, Bob Lazar. Now, Bob Lazar is an interesting character. Now, if he has a documentary on Netflix. He's also appeared on a lot of different podcasts. If you want to know more about Bob Lazar, spelled Lazar, go check him out. He's a super fascinating individual. So let me give you a little background, and this is pulled from his bio, but basically, this dude was like the top physics scientist in one of the best physics scientists in the United States at the time. This is like late 70s, early 80s. He had advanced physics degrees, doctorates from MIT, that's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He also had a master's degree in electronic technology from Caltech in California. This dude was top-notch brains. Okay. So he gets approached by government officials that were like, hey, we want you to come. Like, we're really fascinated with your work, because he had been working at Los Alamos in New Mexico, basically working on like jet powered cars. Now we've seen jet powered cars that you can, people race jet powered cars in drag strips and everything like that. So he had been working on jet propulsion technology with automobiles. And so he gets approached by the government and they were like, hey, we want you to come out and check this stuff out.
And so he has to go and pass all these background checks. They interview all his family members. FBI runs his stuff, and he goes out there. And what's interesting is when he's out there, he sees all sorts of crazy stuff, and he was just like, "Whoa!" And once you get a top secret government clearance like that, you really can't talk about it. Well, after Bob was done, he starts to talk about it. Okay, he starts to talk about it privately to friends, privately to investigators, and basically what he tells them is that he actually was brought there uh they had found, and allegedly, again, this is allegedly they had found a alien ship, and they basically said, we want to know how it works, we want you to reverse engineer it. So Bob Lazar basically started working on trying to figure out how this thing floated, how did it run. And according to him, he was able to figure out that it ran on something called an antimatter reactor, and the reactor had an element running in called element 115. And you could look up element 115. It's a some people say it doesn't exist, but basically that's what he called it, element, because we did the periodic table of elements, and there's only certain elements that are known. And he was saying that there's an unknown element that powers this kind of reactor that allows the spaceship to, I guess, basically fly in weird kind of ways. Now, when he does this, he comes out to like the Las Vegas media, and he basically just starts telling he has this like voice change and all sorts of things. So he starts telling him all the stuff that he sees over there, and he says it's very compartmentalized. So like he was only allowed to work on this one particular thing. He might have saw other things there, but because it's the way the government works, it's all like broken down into sections. So like they had him just working on this portion. They didn't have him working on any other things. He overheard things, and I'm not going to get into the specifics, but you can go look him up and see what he overheard. Other people talking about other, Air Force officials talking about, certain things that they saw or certain things that they experienced while they were there at Area 51. But he's a very fascinating character, is because he starts leaking this all out. He starts leaking to the press. He starts telling MUFON, which is we talked about on the last episode. MUFON was the Mutual UFO Network. Okay. And basically, he starts doing this, but basically, when you do that and you have a top secret clearance, the government may or may have messed with this guy. Okay. What do I mean by that? All of a sudden, if you look up Bob Lazar and you look up his education records, there's no record of him ever going to college. There's no record of him ever at MIT. There's no record of him at Caltech as a student. Because when you're a student, like even me, like I've been teaching for a long time. I can go back to Arizona State University and I can pull up my student record from a long time ago. Okay. So people have like, well, can you prove that you were a scientist at any of these places? And he was like, well, I used to work at Los Alamos. And they're like, we never even met this guy. We don't know who he is. And not only that, a lot of these universities, like I said, MIT and Cal State, were like, well, we never even seen this guy. He's probably making up a degree. Maybe we just found this guy off the street. Maybe he's crazy. And it's interesting that they basically tried to debunk him and debunk his story. But the stuff that he had and the way you watch this guy talk, go watch his special on Netflix, Bob Lazar. Watch him. This dude is super smart, super smart. And the way he explains things, there's no way. This is not just some average crazy person that Netflix found. It was like, oh, well, you allegedly worked at Area 51. No, this dude, listen to him talk. This dude knows his stuff. And he explains, he has this little like house in the middle of the desert, and he built all this stuff by himself. You have to be so smart to do. And he shows you all these different drawings, how stuff works, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, there's no way this dude's legit, because I don't know how, even if you're a crazy person, you're able to do the stuff that he shows in this Netflix video. You'd have to have an advanced degree in mathematics and science to do some of the stuff that he shows you on this show. So, which leaves credence to Bob Lazar's story, is like when you start getting close like that, is it possible? I'm just asking a question. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. Okay. Is it possible that maybe this story could check out? I don't know. There's a lot of people that say this guy made this whole stuff up. There's a lot of people in the other camp are like, no, this dude's legit. Okay. And basically, things had happened where they basically said that he didn't do any of this stuff, that he made it all up. And it was all covered up. So it's like you're either in one camp. I never met anyone that's like into UFOs or technology like that, but whoa, yeah, Bob Lazar, like yeah, I could take or leave him. No, it's either you're like that dude's totally legit, and I believe everything he says, or no, this dude made the story up. Now, Area 51's interesting because everyone's like Area 51, Area 51. But if you really know stuff, I mean, you really think you know alien. That's when I meet people who are like, I'm into aliens. Okay, like I'm interested in it. Okay, I'm like, do you know about Dulce? Now, as we say, allegedly, air quotes again, allegedly, Dulce is the spot that Area 51's old news. Like it was a major thing back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, up to the 80s. But now it's just a regular Air Force base. It's nothing, the government just plays this little mind games and people like, oh, it doesn't exist. Okay. But too many people have seen the planes go in and out of Area 51 to let you know that there's some kind of Air Force thing going on there. I don't know exactly what goes on into in modern times. I don't know. You can do your own research. But the one that's really interesting, and people say this is the real Area 51, is Dulce, New Mexico. Now, Dulce, New Mexico is located kind of on the border between Colorado and New Mexico. And it's located in a small little mountain town. And it's located on a Apache reservation. So it's first off, it's on an Indian reservation. So you really can't even get up there unless you're not a tribal member. And that's the way a lot of Native American reservations are. Like if you go to any of the reservations here, you have to have special passes, you have to have special permits to go in that land. Like, for example, I've been all over Navajo land and I've been all over Apache land, which we have a lot here in Arizona. And you have to buy a pass. You can't just go camping there. You can't just go shooting. You definitely can't go shooting in any of these places. You can't do a lot of different things. You can't go hiking. You can't go any of that. Picnicking unless you have permission. If you're a member of the nation, like you're a member of an Apache, the San Carlos tribe, and then you can do whatever you want. But as for someone that is not Native American, yeah, you have to have a pass. You have to have written permission to even go on that land. And it's funny because like I hunt really close to the Apache border, and like how many times people have told me like, well, what if you shoot like a deer or shoot an elk and he runs over to the Apache land? They're like, well, I guess it is what it is. You ain't gonna get it. And he said, because I mean, I've had people literally tell me straight up that like they shot an elk or a deer and the deer went over the line into reservation land, and when they went to get it, the sheriffs there in Apache San Carlos territory were like, why? I came to get my elk. Do you have permission? No. Well, I guess it's our elk now. And the sheriff straight up said, if you don't leave, we're going to arrest you. And so like, that's the kind of stuff that goes on in the reservation. Okay. So back to Dulce. So Dulce is interesting because we start actually with a sheriff out there. Now the sheriff was like a sheriff in the town of Dulce, New Mexico, and he was just like a small town sheriff. And he starts to investigate a lot of things, weird things going on there in Dulce, cattle mutilations, that kind of thing. And we see a lot of cattle mutilations like in a lot of different other places, like Skinwalker Ranch in Utah is probably the most famous. For cattle mutilations, places in Texas, Roswell in New Mexico. There's a lot of crazy stuff that apparently has happened in New Mexico. But this guy starts to investigate all these different things, and again, all the local people there, like, oh yeah, there's a base up there. Okay, allegedly, allegedly, there's a base up there in these mountains. And people say that they've seen objects fly out of the mountains, so forth. They see weird ships. They see these cattle mutilations. And so this has been going like an ongoing urban legend in Dulce. It wasn't until this guy. Now, before I get into this part, I'm gonna say you might want to take what I say with a grain of salt. Okay, and it's up to you to do your own research or not, whether you believe this guy and this next story I'm gonna tell you, because it's straight up wild. When I heard this guy, I actually heard him talk. Um, when I heard this guy, I'm like, this is the most absolute wild nonsense that there is. But when I actually sat through his lecture, I was like, bro, this might have happened to this dude. I mean, he could back a lot of different things up. So let me give you about this guy. His name is Philip Schneider. Now, Philip Schneider was an engineer. He's an explosives engineer. And he worked for the government. He had high top secret level clearance, kind of like Bob Lazar, but except unlike Bob Lazar, who was a scientist, this guy was a government contractor. And so the government recruits him to basically start, building and exploding on. That's what he specialized, like in mines, explosives underground, that kind of thing. So he gets into this thing, and he's like trying to figure out what they want. And they're being very vague with him. And all the time that he's there, he's like trying to explore different ways to like where they want whatever this underground base is. And so he starts like exploring all these different holes and different caves and stuff within these mountains. And while he was in there, he was escorted by like top high level people there, army people, allegedly, that were with him. Now, one of these times while he was um, exploring one of these things, and he was drilling, and he blew up a hole, and while he blew up the hole, according to him, he says, this is his direct words, that he realized that they might have bumped into something they should have bumped into. And he claims to say that he saw a 7-foot tall, he said, was the gray type aliens with like, the big dark black eyes, gray skin. He says smelled horrible. It smelled some kind of horrible, disgusting smell that he couldn't even describe. And he freaked out. Okay. And next thing you know, like more of these alien things start popping up. And so him and the special army people that were there get into a straight up gunfight with these alien creatures. And so, like, he said that he had grabbed a pistol from one of the military people there and shot and killed 2 aliens. Like he like shot them, and like they fell down. While this was happening, like the aliens were fighting back. So it wasn't just that first one he saw, more showed up. And they get into this huge gunfight between the special forces army guys, Philip Schneider, and then these gray aliens, and they're fighting him, and they have like laser type. He basically said it was like a laser pistol, and one of these laser pistols shot his hand and blew off some of his fingers. And he, obviously he went down. At that point, he basically like he like was saved by one of these green beret type special ops guys that like pushed him out the hole that they had and they like buried it back up, and he was killed by one of these grays. Now what's interesting is that when he's saying this speech, and the people are like, well, how do we know if we believe you at the end of it? This is crazy. He was like, oh, remember, because he said the alien shot his hand and it basically blew off all his fingers. In this lecture that I watched and listened to, he holds up his hand and he's missing fingers, like surgically. I mean, it was weird. Like, why would you lose fingers like that? And when you when you lose a finger, they try to cut it off with the knuckle. These look like they were complete, like he was born that way. But he clearly said, like, I wasn't born that way. Like they were lasered off with precision. And he says that I survived. So he's telling this story, and while he's down there, he starts telling he just basically starts leaking it all. And he basically said, we're going to get into the alleged craziness of it. So that if that alien fight with the government is alleged alien fight between the government isn't enough for you, what Philip Schneider tells everyone in this lecture just blew our minds. He basically said that while he was there, basically there's 7 levels of this Dulce base. First level, that's security. And he said was like, top level government officials, you'd have to check in there. And then you had to take an elevator down to all these different levels. So the second level, that's where they kept everyone's housing. So when he would stay there and do like, the explosive things with the government, he would just stay there. It was like, they had a cafeteria, always all military people there, military and scientists. Under that was the executive, like the hot top military brass labs and stuff like that. Now, this is where it gets crazy. Is that so? He said that he wasn't allowed to go to certain floors, but when he would take the elevator up and down, okay, to go to his job site where he was doing these underground explosives, he saw different things. Because when the elevator opens on the floor, right, you could look down the hall, right, and you could see all sorts of crazy things like that, right? And according to him, he saw all sorts of crazy stuff on floors 4, 5, 6, and 7. According to him, allegedly, he said that there was all sorts of experiments going on, but it wasn't just humans experimenting with aliens. He said there were other aliens there experimenting on different things, experimenting on humans, experimenting on hybrids, all sorts of crazy nonsense that I've never heard before. He talked about he said the tall grays were there. He saw there was basically, I believe, according to him, he was like, there's 9 alien species. He says some were more friendly than others, some were not. Some were like, he said there was ones that were they're called Lumerians, and we'll talk more about them in Mount Shasta. He said they were like really beautiful, tall, like they look like humans, but they were like 9-10 feet tall. They have blonde hair, blue eyes, pointy ears like an elf. He said they were very kind and very friendly and benevolent. He said, but there were also other aliens. He says, like, I saw a reptilian, and we're gonna get into the reptilian phenomena probably in season 3. But he talked about the reptilians, and he said that they were evil. They smell really bad. They had a negative connotation with them. He said they're the little small gray aliens, like that we recover, like you would say in Roswell. He also saw the tall gray ones. He said there's all these different types. You can do your own research on the different types of aliens that were there. But basically, he said that they were doing all sorts of experiments with scientists. Okay, that they were working hand in hand with these government things, allegedly. Okay. Now, again, this story is pretty wild. It's pretty crazy because it's like, this guy. Now, what's interesting about this guy is this guy actually, he actually gets killed after he starts going around telling people these tours and stuff like that. He ends up dying in a mysterious circumstance. Now, what that mysterious circumstance is, that's for you to do your own research. I'm not going to get into that. You can do your own. All you have to do is just spend an afternoon on Google, DuckDuckGo, and do your own research. Just type in Philip Schneider, Dulce, and you can look up what happened to him and see his story. I don't think his talk is on YouTube anymore. I saw it way back in the day. Like, this is like back in the day of Napster. And so people are like, what's Napster? Napster was like before you could share files on Apple Music and Pandora and all the stuff, Spotify, Netflix, Amazon Prime. Okay, Amazon actually used to be a bookseller, if you didn't know that. That's interesting. But basically, Napster was like you could like download music and movies illegally. And that's how I came across this. Is like people were like that I knew that were really into aliens. They were like, yo, you got to try this guy. And I watched his like lectures, from like the late 90s, before he passed away. And that's why I said like where he was telling us all these different levels and all the stuff they experienced there. And like it was, I remember that because everyone was everyone did a big shot because it's like, how do we believe you, man? How do we believe that you're there? And he's like, this, and he holds up his hand, and his hand was all jacked up from when he allegedly got shot by a Gray's alien laser. And again, you could read the story yourself. You can go on Epoch Times. You can go on HuffPost. His articles there. You can redo your more research. I'm not going to try to get too heavy into it because again, this is a very controversial topic. I don't want nothing happening to me. I don't want nothing happen to my life or my family or my friends or my students. So this is why we like kind of like low key just kind of give you the information about it. But anyways, that's what we have for tonight. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. I know it was kind of short. But we are going to probably be wrapping up for the summer. We might do one or two extra ones in the coming weeks before we start season 3 in August. So stay tuned for any of those. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you haven't heard any of the other episodes, please go back and listen to them again. It really supports our podcast. We definitely appreciate your love and support. Thank you so much to our wonderful resident artist, Andrea V. We also thank our support to our fans who made the music. Greed Full of Hate. We're definitely appreciate of his music. Please like and share his stuff. If you want a beat, definitely go check him out. He will hook you up. Just tell me, I want that DJ Nemo beat, and he will make you a custom beat. So thank you again for your love and support. And as we say, be safe, be well, and we'll see you on the dark side of the mountain.